Hello and welcome back to Oversky Deck Doctor. This week we're going to take a look at a Monthly Cup Champions deck. Alvar won Monthly Cup 15, and one of the decks that brought this success to him was his mono green. Now, before Oversky, Alvar was well known as a very strong mono green player, and this time for the Monthly Cup he brought a mono green list to help counter the red combat. But also, it does pretty well on its own. I've been playing this quite a bit, and it is a very solid list. Now, this plays like a slow deck, not as mid-rangey as Mono Green has been in the past. You build from the size of your orb, you set up some collectors, and then you start applying pressure with your big bodies, and eventually you can teleport a threat to your opponent's orb and push some damage. So, yeah, it does pretty well. If you're having a lot of trouble against red combat, mono green is definitely a good selection right now. Although red combat can win the matchup, red combat's in a very strong position right now where it can pretty much win any matchup as long as it draws very well. Alright, so let's move on to the cards, take a look at the deck list and see what they do. To kick things off, we're going to take a look at the taunt creatures, but most importantly, these are creatures you want to see in the early game. Living Willow is absolutely fantastic. It's a 1/7 free Faeria collector. You'll be using this creature to gather Faeria or lock out those pesky Kalim's followers and Origin monks, so it's a very good card in defending against Yellow Rush. But most importantly, its 7 life allows Feed the Forest to be a massive swing for you. So playing Feed the Forest on Willow will gain you 7 Faeria, but you pay 1 Faeria for feed, so you essentially gain 6, and you're able to draw a card. And this burst of Faeria will allow you to play a lot of bigger threats in one turn, like a Verdant Force, a Grove Guardian, and maybe even a Faeria Golem as well, if you have enough Forest. So just a great card all around. You can use this as a collector, and then once you have some pressure applied to you, or you want to develop more board, just use Feed the Forest, get rid of it, and then you can make a big swing turn. Now, Wood Elemental is another key component of Mono Green and any land ramp deck. We've seen this card be nerfed because of how powerful it was, but now it's much more balanced and reasonable. You'll be wanting this in the early game, especially if you're on the Explore. This can be a fantastic turn 1 play. Lets you get a turn 1 collector down and start building forests. But most importantly, it's a taunt, it's cheap, and it builds those forests, allowing you to get quicker access to Runin, the Relentless, and your Faeria Golem. So just a great card all around. A Grove Guardian, a very, very sturdy creature for its cost. A 5 Faeria, 5/6. Very good stats for its cost. Free forest, sorry. But Wood Elemental does cover that for you. So Wood Elemental is going to be able to get this card down much quicker. And then you have a Taunter as well. So this is a card that can help you defending against some of the bulkier threats from rush decks like Shaitan Demons or War Yaks, like those style of cards. And it's just a generally good body, so you can place this creature down. It's a 5/6, and it's going to be a little bit of trouble to deal with. And of course, all these cards are affected by power-ups, so if you want to extend their power to make sure they can have more influence on board, be sure to drop some power-ups on them. The next selection of cards are the non-legendary beaters, the big bodies that are going to help you win the board. Faeria Golem, 5/10 with no text, 5 Faeria, 5 forests. Very pricey in the land cost, but such a massive stat line. 10 life is going to keep it on board for a very long time. And failing that, if you need a burst of Faeria, you can just feed it. You can use Feed the Forest on this, gain 9 Faeria, draw a card, and then produce more threats or more taunters depending on the situation. So Faeria Golem, just a very, very solid creature. Verdant Force, very much on the same level as Faeria Golem. Very solid creature, a 7/7. It's a great aggressive stat lines. This is a great card to apply pressure with to your opponent's orb. 7 attack is quite menacing and can set up lethal in 3 turns on its own, so a very, very powerful threat. And 6 Faeria as well, so quite reasonable in its Faeria cost and its land cost as well. So you can use this as an early defender, just to punch away any big threats your opponents are developing. And then when you want to push some damage, you can either develop a Verdant Force near your opponent or teleport one up to push some damage. So great, both of these cards are great. They are just staples in any mono green list. The one standout thing about the mono green list from Alvar's monthly cup run is the amount of legendaries in it. We have Time of Legends, which is a tutor for these legendaries. It can search either Runin or Tephra. So if you draw Runin, you're going to guarantee to draw Tephra. If you've drawn both of them, it shuffles a colored card into your deck, so you can choose between any color, but you're going to probably choose green. And the one thing I will say about Time of Legends is you probably want to play this before you have to use it to shuffle a random legendary in your deck, because you're going to want to draw all the cards in your deck anyway, and you don't want anything like a Tarim showing up when you don't have enough Faeria to play it. So yeah, you want to use this card ideally before you draw both your legends. The other legend is Runin, the Relentless. This is a fantastic creature, very durable, a very dominant creature before Oversky came out and introduced the swallow mechanic. The earlier you get this down, the more value it's going to give you, and this can be an absolute nightmare for red combat because they're currently not running Crystal Flowers. That may change if mono green becomes too much of a problem, but right now Runin, a very strong card that's going to return your hand, gain +2/+2. Once this becomes a massive creature, don't be afraid to feed the Forester. You're going to get a lot of Faeria back, and you're probably going to be able to replay her. So just a fantastic card in mono green. Now the last card, Tephra, Soul of the Wild. This is my favorite dragon, actually. I really like Tephra. Just giving that massive power up to a creature. I mean, a 6/6 flyer with charge 2 in green is something that's really attractive. So Tephra is a fantastic dragon. It can superpower one of your creatures or even herself to make her an 11/11 with flying in charge. It can be very deadly against red combat, especially if they're not running Swallow. So she has a lot of applications in that matchup and just generally a powerful card overall. Now, you guys might not have access to all these legendaries. So I was thinking, what would I do if I didn't have these legends? And honestly, I'd probably just add Tiki Caretakers. Tiki Caretakers are cheap power-ups and could be an alternative to these legendary cards until you find them. Up next we have some of the utility cards. We have Feed the Forest, which I've talked about extensively already. Destroy a friendly creature, gain Faeria equal to its Faeria, gain Faeria equal to its life, and draw a card. So very powerful way to cycle through your deck, boost your economy and your Faeria, and yeah, just sack maybe a useless creature that's not helping you. Voice of Truth and Sagami Grovecall are actually two good creatures to feed. They don't give you as much Faeria as Living Willow does, but they don't really do much once they've been played. They're definitely used for their gift ability, so if you already have some really good creatures on board and looking for something to feed, you can feed one of these. But another use of Feed the Forest is feeding your own creature when you're going for lethal if you're being blocked. So for example, say you have two creatures in a row next to your opponent's orb. One is on the well and one's in front of your opponent's orb, and your opponent has a body blocked you, so you can't move both creatures around the orb to hit for lethal. So what you can do is just hit with your first creature in front of your opponent's orb, then feed it, then move the creature off the well into its position, and then finish them off. So it's a good way to end games as well in the right situation. Now, Sagami Grovecaller is the premium mobility trick for green. They don't have anything else other than this card right now. Silent Horsemaster is an option, but Alvar did opt for 3 Sagami Grovecallers, and one of the reasons might be is because his red combat was using 3 Silent Horsemasters. But I wanted to stick true to the deck, and so we're going to talk about Sagami Grovecaller here. Teleport a friendly creature to a forest you control. Very powerful in the right situation. And this is why Sagami Grovecaller is often used as a way to either control the board or push a creature from a defensive position to an aggressive position to apply pressure to your opponent's orb. So don't be afraid to start building, say, neutrals at one side and then drop a forest near your opponent's orb, because that forest can be utilized later on for future teleports in order to push damage and win the game. Now, Voice of Truth is a one-of, and I really like this card. This card is pretty cool, and we haven't seen it much since Oversky. Gift, restore a creature to its original attack and life. So this card has 2 primary uses with its gift. Healing up one of your own creatures after it's taken damage. So if you have a low life Faeria Golem or a Veteran Force, you can heal it back up to its original stat line, and then your opponent has to deal with a whole fresh new creature. Another way to use this card is to restore power-up creatures back to their original life. Some of people have called these creatures questing creatures. So Zealous Crusader is a good example. If the Zealous Crusader is at an 11/11, you can reset it back to a 3/3 and manage it. So not too many applications to this. I guess it's just like debuffing opponent back to its original state. So say a Cypher's being powered up with Elderwood Embrace in Crackthorn, you can bring it back down to size so you can clear it. So Voice of Truth has a lot of utility, but only a one of in this list, and with 5 life is also a great Feed the Forest target. Last but not least, we have the power-up cards and a form of utility in Emperor's Command. Speaking of Emperor's Command, choose one, give a creature -2, -1, deal 3 damage to a structure or gain 4 life. So this has a lot of use. You can use it to debuff a creature so you can clear it. You can use it to deal 3 damage to a structure. So this will primarily probably get used on Crystal Flower to free one of your creatures, and then gain 4 life. So if your opponent is trying to rush you down or you're trying to race your opponent, you can use this to gain life and keep in the race. Radiant Guidance, again, choose one. Give a creature +2/+2, so just a flat power up, very nice there. Or gain 5 life, so another way to sustain yourself or, again, win a race. Last but not least, Elderwood Embrace, the kind of premium power up for green. +2/+4, so the 4 life is going to be very important because it'll allow your creatures to stay alive, and there are a lot of creatures already have a decent life stat in this deck anyway, so being able to push them even further, especially your Taunters, might make it very difficult for your opponent to clear them. Now that we've seen the deck list, let's take a look at the mulligan. Very straightforward. You're looking for a creature that costs 2 forests so you can play it on turn 2. Or you're looking for Wood Elemental to play on turn 1 if you're the second player. So Living Willow is a turn 2 play regardless, whereas Wood Elemental will be a turn 1 play if you pick up Explore. So you Explore, Forest, Wood Elemental, and that will get you a collector very early on. So these are the ideal creatures because they're cheap, they're durable, and they're going to collect Faeria for you in the early game. Now Veteran Force isn't a bad option, it is a turn 2 play. But not as good as these guys. But if you do find a Veteran Force in your hand and you're a little anxious that you won't find that turn 2 collector, don't be afraid to keep it. Another good card to pick up is Elderwood Embrace. Elderwood Embrace is fantastic because it'll extend the power of your creatures and you'll be able to fight on board much earlier. So yeah, Elderwood Embrace, great card. Going to keep your creatures alive as well, especially against red. You want to keep as many Faeria collectors down as possible so you can produce these big creatures and overwhelm them. Other keeps you could consider is Runin if you have a Wood Elemental. That basically means you're able to get Runin down early, which is always great. So Runin's not a bad keep as well, but ideally you want to find a turn 2 play, start collecting Faeria, and then start to overpower your opponent. The big question, how much does this deck cost? And we've already seen 3 legendaries in the lineup. And as you can see, a hefty 1,545 Memoria. And it actually works out 960 Memoria is spent on legends. Legendary cards are 320 Memoria each. And the only legendary I think you absolutely need is Runin. I think the other 2 are optional. Now, there's not a lot of epics in this, which is really nice. Quite a few rares and commons, but they are quite cheap. And one thing to note, there are no Oversky cards in this deck. It is a core set build. One thing I did mention before, if you would like to replace the legendaries, I think Tiki Caretakers can be a good replacement for now. They give power-ups, they collect Faeria. Tiki Caretakers are pretty decent cards, and they're commons, so you'll be able to get them very easily, and then save up for those legendary cards. But if you were to prioritize a legendary, I would say Runin is your #1 priority. Get her first, and then I would consider getting Time of Legends before Tephra, because then you can guarantee you get that Runin. So it gives you basically 2 draws for Runin. And then if you feel like you want Tephra as well, you can add Tephra in later on. But yeah, quite a pricey deck, but it's the legendaries that make the most of the total cost when it comes to crafting this deck. So if you do make some budget alterations like the Tiki Caretakers, you should be able to play this deck just fine. Let's move on to the strengths and weaknesses. Sturdy creatures is #1, so a lot of the creatures in this list have high life values and decent attack values, so they'll be very hard to clear when it comes to combat. Hard removal will always be a bit bit sad, but when it comes to creature combat, you have a significant advantage because of the high life creatures and because of all the power-ups in the deck. And power-ups and teleportation. Teleportation is very strong, but it can be quite situational, so you need to set up your forest quite preemptively if you want to set up a good teleport. But it is a very powerful form of mobility, especially when you see a Virgin Force at the bottom of the board, teleport to the top of the board, your opponent might get caught off guard by that, and you can apply a lot of pressure with teleportation. Can outlast decks in the long game with big creatures, so your creatures outvalue your opponent in combat. There are only a few creatures in the game that can kind of trade value with your creatures. Windstorm Charger, because it trades up the curve with its event synergy, and the Underground cards, because they gain Faeria while they're in combat, and gain a lot of life when you use Gift of Steel with them, but there are not a lot of creatures that can match Green's raw power, so you can win the long games. You can kind of wall up, use your big bodies, and outlast your opponent, so there are opportunities to stall and kind of play for fatigue. In this list you have a lot of healing as well, but you probably don't want to go for that, but yeah, like I said, if that becomes an option for you to win the match, try it. It probably will work out. You have a lot of healing and your creatures will give you a lot more value. Now, the deck is weak to removal like Crystal Flower, Last Nightmare, Choking Sands in some situations as well, so hard removal and soft removal like Frogify, Mirror Phantasm, Crystal Flowers and the Azure Skywhales are going to be a problem for green, especially if you're behind on board. They can use removal to starve you with Faeria, so you've got to be careful and make sure you have collectors down to just to guarantee that you don't lose the game on the spot to some well-timed removal, and you can keep your economy going and be able to defend. Now, can get overwhelmed by tempo decks. I think this is one of Green's biggest weaknesses. It's quite a slow deck. It wants to set up, it wants to get into a strong, stable position, and then start doing stuff to the board like clearing creatures and teleporting around. Whereas tempo decks don't do that. They just want to overwhelm you as quickly as possible and make sure you can't set up into these comfortable positions. So stuff like yellow tempo can be a bit of a problem for Green, especially if they get very crazy draws where they just chain off hard removal and fly their charges over to you. So tempo decks can be a big problem, but overall, if you're looking to beat decks like Red Combat, Mono Green right now is a very good option. Land placement is pretty straightforward. You want to build from the sides of your orb to your own wells and take control of them and fight at your own wells. You're a very defensive deck quite naturally, and collecting off your own wells is just fine. You can put a sturdy creature on the opposite side to your opponent's developing, and that creature will probably stick around and collect Faeria for you for most of the game. Living Willow and Wood Elementals are great options when having this collector off to the one side. Eventually you're gonna have to push up and fight your opponent, so just push up the same side if you take control of it and win combat and take control of the two wells, or if you're struggling a bit and still kind of conflicted on that side, build up the opposite side, try and get an aggressive forest down, and then you can use that for later teleports from the Sagami Grove Caller, or you can set up some more aggressive creatures like a Virgin Force to apply pressure. That's pretty much it. You want to build 5 forests, you want to get to that Faeria Golem. Any additional forests you build, you probably want to build them closer to your opponent, and that will give you an avenue to win the game. And that wraps up this episode of Deck Doctor. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and congratulations to Alvar for winning the monthly cup and bringing Mono Green back into the spotlight. Mono Green is a great list to start with if you're new to Faeria. It's a very simple concept behind it. It's just board control until you find an opening where you can attack your opponent, and it can teach you a lot about land placement, moving creatures, and yeah, using mobility like a teleport effect to either influence the board or apply pressure. So a great deck to start off with, and if you don't have the legends, like I said, Tiki Caretakers are fine replacements. Thanks again for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, drop a subscribe to keep up to date of when our content goes live. We have monthly cup VOD, so if you did miss the monthly cup on Twitch, you can watch it here on YouTube. So check out the playlist on our channel. And yeah, thank you very much for watching again. Hope to see you next time. Take care and enjoy Mono Green.